Cloud. There we are.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone. Glad to have you with us. Mike is uh, hosting today, in addition to me being remote from Duke University Cybersecurity Conference. So I'm delighted, all right, to be with you. If I drop for any reason, you won't, because Mike has a con. Uh, Interesting, that I was invited to come to this at the same time that this conference is taking place. I just came off of a panel about incident response, right? For what do you do when you're hacked and your
Hmm.
ransomware is involved, and um, it was a lot less technical than I thought it was. They kind of laid out the business model for how do you do this, right? It's interesting. They're at a break, so if you hear background noise, this is just part of being in this environment. So, cybersecurity, big topic, and lots of things that happening. Um, I'm going to just tell you that I was invited by a Department of Defense to talk about the same thing early next week, and I'm not sure I'm going to go because I can't get any sense of whether they're this is a paid gig or whether I'm volunteering, right? But lots of lots of interest in the topic. And Mike, I think that it's changing quite a bit because the computational power that you can throw at both doing the hacking and the phishing and the uh, breaking in, and then the ability to put up defenses. Um, you know, we're we're in an escalating stage of offense and defense right now. And when we get to tomorrow and they talk about quantum computing, I think that a lot of the stuff changes again. But what do you think? Where do you think we are?
Well, I think, compared to, initial days when I started working with computers, I mean, the level of uh redundancy they have in the security protocols is, com- amazing to me even at this stage. But as you point out, I believe I just couldn't find it in time for the call. It was one I did not put aside in my note field, was an Ars Technica article that, there was cases where they seem to be showing that theoretically you could get to a computer that was air gapped. They had figured out, they were getting very close to knocking that little horse down. That I thought, boy, if you really want to have your computer be safe and you're not worried about the internet, you just want to have your book or whatever on there. Oh, just never connect it to the internet. Well, there's that, but that's an outlier situation. I think, what I think strikes me now is, the amount of investment that we're finally seeing by companies in this over the last 25 years. That's was one of the most those are the most some of the most the busiest analysts at analyst firms are those that have certification and experience in security. I think the cryptographical thing, I think the cryptography is fascinating, in as much as, we've seen such, massive amounts of it being done in the furtherance of things like, Bitcoin economies, et cetera. So, I mean, but I think it's, the notion that it's an ongoing discussion. Those were, that's what it was like for me. It was like that in the 90s. Was the security became even more and more important. It was becoming a big defined research group at a lot of companies. Um, and I don't know whether it's because, you could sit here and think, well, it's because they figured everything out and everything's very secure, or nobody just wants to talk about it. Is it just that they don't want to talk about it out loud, Kevin? I'm very curious about that, notion, that that kind of obscurity and lack of transparency. Is that still a kind of a big component of what you were hearing at the show?
Uh, I'm not deep enough into it to have a perspective on that. I'll probably have a perspective by the end of the day today. Um, but I will point this out. A lot of the kinds of incidents that we used to have people report on, we're in the physical world. That look at what's happening to McDonald's right now. Some onions got into the supply chain, and a third of the stores across the central part of the United States going up into toward Oregon are Big Macs aren't. I mean, yeah, that's
Quarter
not the right thing.
pounders.
Quarter pounders are off the menu, right, because of onions. All right, they think that that's the cause, and more often than not these days, what we have as Ben, we had that as an earlier topic is this kind of your personal data has been provided to somebody on the dark web, or the company got hacked, or their files are locked up. And it would seem to me that the frequency of this is sufficient that I don't know why entities wouldn't pony up a little bit more money for their IT infrastructure to be less vulnerable, right? Because a lot of times, it's a general, just search for vulnerabilities, and they find something. They're not looking for anything in particular, and they say, "Oh, look, we got a hit." And the business model that was described this morning was you have that team, and then you have a team that actually locks up the system, and you have a third team that's basically the marketing team and engagement that goes and say, "Hey, you got to give us money, or we're gonna, nuke your system." Um, Interesting. Those three teams make sense, all right, to me, and it's a business. Can we, figure out a way to make that business less lucrative? Who's somebody else wants to jump in?
Mark's hand was raised his hand a minute ago. Go ahead, Mark.
I just wanted to respond to what you said, Mike. This was several years ago. There was a guy I ran into from one of the top cybersecurity firms who said it doesn't matter whether your computers are on or off. If you take a computer to China, for example, all the data on your computer, whether you turn it on or not, will be taken off that computer. So I think that, and going to Kevin's, what he just said, I think you're absolutely right. It's less vulnerable. I don't think there's anything that we can do anymore, or certainly in 10 years, we won't be anything we can do to make it secure, 100% secure. Data is data. It's going to float around the world. It's going to be accessed by those who really want it. Even national security data, probably. And but where you can be is less vulnerable, and I agree with that.
I suppose that one of the things that I would point out, there was a book that Eric Yelkenstaller, one of our board advisors, wrote that was called Hidden in Plain Sight. And he's talking about marketing and customer engagement, but rather than can you get to it, is can you make it look uninteresting, right? Because the fact is that can you recharacterize this so that people who are coming in just don't want to pay attention to what they're looking at, because it's going to be a deluge. I mean, just think about if you could do what you're talking about, Mark, and everything was available all the time, then it would be an attention management problem. It would be a signal detection problem, right? Is that a bird or an ICBM, coming at us? And you would want to fool the system from a signal detection point of view into saying, I don't need to pay attention to this. It's just a bird, right? Although it might be something else. So I think that those are strategies that we're going to have to give some consideration to.
Yeah,
Suzanne,
I think for a long
go ahead,
time there's
Rob.
been I'm sorry. I think for a long time there's been an acknowledgement that you're going to get hacked at some point. You're going to get broken into at some point, whether you're a small business, large enterprise, multinational, whatever. The word that a lot of security vendors and security teams at enterprises are using now is resilience, right? It's how quickly can you recover? How quickly can you identify the attack? How quickly can you take steps to mitigate the damage before it becomes a serious issue? All those types of things. So that's kind of how folks have pivoted to away from locking everything down to how quickly can we fix something when it gets
Right.
broken into.
Suzanne, I think you were ready to raise
Oh.
your hand. Go ahead.
Actually, no, I wasn't. No, a really awesome conversation. I was listening. Oh, by the way, Kevin, congratulations. I listened to the podcast yesterday. That was outstanding. What an incredible platform and that medium. Were those individuals speaking about
No.
were they?
This was created by Google Notebook LM, right? They're fake, or
Oh my, yeah,
they're generated. So the fact is, we gave it the that platform the book manuscript, said read this and now do 10-minute version of that. Kyle created that, and it's really interesting that there are a couple of places where what it synthesized was better than what we wrote. One example of that is when we're talking about data cooperatives and getting, that what have these things been trained on so far? They've been trained on what's generally available on the World Wide Web. And they said it's like giving access to the library, but only the children's section of the library, right? That there's a whole bunch of other stuff that is, behind enterprise firewalls and inside of government SCIFs and other kind. I mean, does AI, the way that we currently understand, have general access to the coolest knowledge that humans have? No, not really. It has access to general knowledge. So anyway, it
was.
I didn't write that. Kyle
Suzanne,
didn't write that.
I would encourage you. You can take any one. You can do this in 2 seconds. Take any one of your papers, upload it, and then hit into Notebook LM, and then hit the podcast button, and you will have a podcast like that about your paper in a couple of minutes.
Oh my! I'm definitely gonna try it. But as I am, it's really exciting. But in the context of this conversation with cybersecurity, there just seems to be more of an emphasis on the teaming of networks, amongst us and other groups that we're involved in, where we support each other if we recognize something. And it just seems as more and more DAO infrastructures are set up, that I'm hoping that cyber attacks for the smalls start to decrease.
So you just said DAO. Do you mean distributed autonomous organizations? That DAO? Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and well, I was listening to this very early this morning. I guess it was David Shapiro, when he was talking about the expanding marketplace and the need for networking, and through leveraging a DAO environment where we could be able to increase the sandboxes, and like you said, Kevin, to create an environment that is not as sought after or interesting, just really vanilla. But that is a wise approach, I think, with what you said to this context. But I think the networking, the trusted networking amongst individuals like us and teams like us, I think is a really positive step forward. But it is a viable threat. It'll be really interesting what you learn today and tomorrow.
Ed, thank you, Suzanne. You're up.
2 thoughts. One is just to follow up on the quantum idea, and I was, at IBM up until not too long ago, and quantum is certainly something that they are putting a lot of effort into, and I feel like the thought leadership that they were putting out there into the marketplace was the idea that quantum will be able to break traditional, cybersecurity based on traditional computing, that it will be able to break it, and therefore businesses should start thinking about being quantum proof or quantum ready. And those solutions, may or may not involve quantum itself, right? So it may be other methods too.
They don't, by the way.
But that you should start thinking about it now, and be ready for when the time comes, so that you're not caught off guard.
Yeah, by the way, they just came up with a new encryption method. I forget the name of it. That's been standardized, and so why we can break the RSA codes is because you have a quantum encryption algorithm that does a quantum Fourier transform to do the breaking of the code. But this new method does it. I think it uses vector analysis that is quantum, because there's not a quantum algorithm to break this code.
Yet.
Yeah. Well, supposedly
Right.
this people have done the analysis and said they think it's safe.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because aren't there a fairly few organizations that can actually afford quantum computers right now? It's a fairly limited
Everything
set
is
of
safe until it's not safe.
till it's not safe. Exactly. Yeah, it's all good till it's not.
And
Which, go ahead.
well, you know what? No, it's a slight shift. So I'll let that play out.
There was a very slight shift, Ed. I don't think that it was.
Go
I
ahead.
don't think it got
No,
purchased.
what I was going to suggest, but I'll just go ahead and say it. What I'm going to say is a slight shift. Is that what I've seen when it comes to, for any company, when it comes to cybersecurity, and having done a lot of work in internal communications, and therefore, trying to make not quantum, but cybersecurity a reality within a company. You have the people who are kind of expecting the company's IT is going to protect me, from this, and I expect them to do that and protect me, while the IT is also expecting a lot of behaviors from the people that they need to be smart about cybersecurity and do a lot of things, frankly, to recognize threats, and then what to do to mitigate the effects of those kind of threats. And people feel like, well, I'm so busy with my regular work, why do I need to be totally on top of this? So that's the kind of thing where if you get down into the making it a reality phase, there's, I think, a lot of operational challenges.
Well, I think
Those
that's a
goddamn
really
people.
well, it's true. More, I mean, well, even in the era of quantum, as it perhaps as it spreads in terms of availability to folks, businesses, etc. I would have guessed that a few years from now, security experts are going to say, but still the number one long term will always be their threat is social engineering, and that's just people. And I think, Ed, I was going to jump in there with what you're saying. You probably were one of those people involved in writing those scripts for the training sessions people like I went to for many years. How many of you? It's happened to me. The phishing tests, where you got this email. It's like, oh, well, of course, Rob would send me a file like that, not noting that it wasn't Rob O'Regan, it was Rob Reagan O, and I didn't pick that up. And that was there was a fairly, you didn't get spanked or anything, but it was like, okay, now you got to go watch that half-hour module and correctly answer the 5 questions based on it, which is, I think what we just described is a great example of that. Over time, as you said, people are just, I show up at work, I assume if I don't, there's some basic rules, here's some passwords, don't share your password, don't write your password on a sticky note and sit it on your terminal, and that was it. And because of that, I think that impact of, or the risk of social engineering issues, like that's, we are finally saying that, nope, this is now part of your employment contract. If you're not, you have to be able to enforce these and recognize, not as an expert, but just as an employee, how to maintain the integrity of the data, et cetera. And I think that's been, I think for folks who are coming into the workforce in the last 10 years, they've grown up with that level of a requirement of security. It's always surprising to me when we see, but it's not always, it does surprise me, that we still see these cases where it's usually social engineering, not some massive, cryptographic pounding that the bad guys are engaged in. It's usually some little thing.
I think
As it always, to Mark's point. What's that?
Passwords are a big part of it too. I think people get lazy there and they'll go for the absolute minimal length accepted when, in fact, if you did a 16 character password, it'll be much more secure, or longer.
Yeah. If you talk to people who are in the security industry, they talk about the 3 things that you can do to secure in this world. something that you know, like a password, something that you have, which is a physical key of some kind, and something that you are, which is the whole world of biometrics, that it's a fingerprint, it's a retina scan, it's a, even in the science fiction, it's a drop of your blood, okay, that, it says, I've got a DNA match, okay, with this system for, granting access. So the most powerful is invoke all three, right? Is that you have to have a strong password, you have to have a physical key, and you have to present something, some part of your, biometric profile to be able to get in. And indeed, most of our very, very secure government systems do require all three.
Yeah.
But it's also a balance, Kevin, between what the company needs to do to protect their assets and the employee experience, right? We talk about a lot about that now, right? Because if the rules are too strict for me, I'm going to go around the rules, and I'm going to make things worse because I'm not following all your policies and procedures that you put in place for me. Yeah.
Right. Why didn't
I
Mike
might
make his
remind
numbers
you
this
of
quarter?
the
He's in
old
training.
Get Smart program, right? The one that Mel Brooks wrote. They had the cone of silence, right? And the cone of silence would come down on the two people that were participating in the meeting, and the system was so effective that you couldn't hear each other, right?
What?
It's like it's
What?
complete security and no communication will take place. So it's like, yeah, you've achieved your security goals, and you can't accomplish anything. Thank you very much, right? Great gag. It came up in every other episode of that in the chief's office, right? Is they would invoke the cone of silence. It's too important, right, for us to not use it. All right.
And but we're not that far away from reading minds, from literally knowing to take the signals coming out of your head and interpreting those. So it's going to very quickly. I mean, this is the exponential speed of change, that it's going to outpace us incredibly, and we have to learn to deal with that kind of pace.
I'm not sure that anyone wants my mental effluence. Okay, so you'll
A lot of filtering, Mark.
We're going to have to be a lot more discerning to be able to make sense of that torrent of information. All right,
Well,
Doug.
But they want things in that mental effluence.
Yeah. The thing is, identity is going to be really important coming up in the future.
Yep.
That how do you prove identity and who, each person is, it's absolutely critical. So, we'll see where that goes. Right now, there's, in fact, Google DeepMind listed how people are violating, abusing AI right now. And I'll post it in the chat, but a lot of it is to do with, identity, either deep fakes or identity or phishing attacks and that kind of stuff. So, I keep trying to say, assume, every email you get is fake, especially if they're asking for money. Even every phone call could be fake or video. And unless you meet the person in person, face to face, like right now, this, when can you put already there's these tools where you can have a deep fake Doug that can interact, right?
Let me tell you something. The when this panel opened up on threat incidents and management, one of the lawyers said, "Oh, I checked in the hotel and I tried one of these things," and he made a 60-second video, and it was. I'm kind of glad to be here, but let me just tell you, Duke University, amongst the other world-class universities around here, this is the least prestigious. And it was a deep fake, right? He just wrote this little, and people were cringing, right, listening to the thing until they realized, oh, it's not really him talking, right? It's it's a joke. But there you go. All right.
Right. And then
it's been with us forever. You said unless you meet in person, the one thing we've never been able to detect reliably is lying. And so when people are in person, they could be saying one thing and you know, thinking or doing something very totally different. Look at you know, Mr. Trump with giving the gifts to Putin and all that kind of stuff. You just this is a bigger problem than just technology.
Right. Well, and there's this brouhaha that Trump said something bad about Hispanics in a funeral, right? And now there's, you know, both sides are yelling at each other, and depending on if you like Trump
So
or don't
easy.
like Trump, you know, you're doing that. In fact, one person I said, in fact, I was thinking of writing this on LinkedIn is, you know, these next 2 weeks, people are going to be saying all kinds of things about, you know, Harris said this, Biden said this, Trump said this, you know, you just basically, unless there's a video of them saying it, you know, and even then it could be a deep fake. So don't believe it, don't share it. And you know,
believe what the
even
general
if it
said.
favors your
Okay.
candidate, right?
You're
Yeah.
going to have to believe who you believe. That, you know, the general said this, and people just dismiss. You can dismiss anything.
So
There's no
we're
proof.
Right.
gonna,
Or you can create, you know, you can say unknown sources said this, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
so
So
I'm gonna turn, okay, the semi a little bit, because, as I've told you guys, we're not going into a political discussion. I'm glad to
right.
skirt
Yeah.
the edges of it, but let's not talk about the election. Let's not talk about politics on Content Evolution New World. That is not our
Okay.
charter
Yeah.
or mission.
Understand.
Doug's point, real quick. Doug's point. We should probably have Harvey Castro join us, and maybe we need to be running him as our bot, you know, for lie detection. Remember when
Yeah,
Harvey
I
did
mean,
that?
yeah, I mean,
That was cool.
one of
I
the
mean,
things that,
great if all these interactions, I mean, in real time, I mean, taking the zero trust approach, you know, from the get-go, you know, is this email an honest email? Is it a lying email? Is this person telling the truth? You know,
yeah, I mean,
it's almost like we
yeah,
have to
from
use some.
Harvey's point of view, and Doug, you know, the work that you've done with Harvey, the writing you've done with him, is, you know, how many, you know, patients go in and lie to their doctor, right, about, you know, their current condition, right? You know, no, I don't drink, you know, 2 bottles of scotch every day. You know, because they're not going to disclose that, right? Well, you know, the liver test says you're kind of messed up here, son. All right, but whatever.
I exercise.
Yeah, whatever. But I'm saying, yes, we have. In fact, isn't there a book called Everybody Lies? I think there is a book.
But you only hurt yourself if you lie to your doctor.
Yeah.
The only
I
one I
know, but
remember,
I'm just saying,
there's,
you know, that it happens. All right. Go ahead.
I've seen there is a book, I think it's a field guide to spotting liars is the name
Oh
of it.
yeah, I've got a
Yeah,
lot.
but if you had constant, which is where we're
Variability.
going, if instead of episodic measurements, if you had continuous telemetry about, you know, my blood pressure and my breathing and what's happening in my daily life, then, you know, you would.
Freeze up.
And the bandwidth at Duke
Freeze up.
just went sideways. Yeah.
You would.
You would.
That was a great cliffhanger.
We're unabated.
He'll come back at some point. But I, you know, where we were headed with that is, I think, you know,
Diagnostic.
oh, Kevin, we lost you there a little bit for about 10 seconds.
After
That
you said
happened.
if you had this, you would, and
Would.
then
And
you
then
I
left.
we,
said if you had continuous telemetry, you would have a much better diagnostic profile and know what to do for a particular individual.
But I think likewise, Kevin, that's the same situation, right? Is that how do you can gather all of that data? How can, you know, the tools are starting to get there, right? For a physician or more likely one of her, you know, team members or support team to be monitoring this. How do you spy, you know, that becomes a very interesting
yeah.
phenomenon in itself, right? Is that constant monitoring of oneself. Now, again, by a third-party device that, you know, I'm not constantly having to, you know, stick my finger to do a blood sample or get a glucose reading, but that ongoing kind of telemetry, right, between, you know, my body and my healthcare provider. It's very interesting. It's like, how much do you store that? I mean, do you need to store to do that effectively? And how often? I know you can get a baseline and then just look for deltas, but I think likewise with security, if you constantly to, I was going to say this to what Mark was mentioning earlier, as far as, you know, the monitoring, it's like, I don't think I want that job of, you know, monitoring the, you know, the, as you were saying, Mark, you know, people are eventually going to be able to kind of do what you described as kind of reading minds. It's like, who wants that job in the government? To have to just constantly review that information would be onerous, I think.
And the way I
No,
would,
but they
the
would be
way,
enabled by AI. Go ahead,
well,
Mark.
we do this with intelligence now. I mean, we constantly monitor with satellites what's going on in you know, Russia and China and Korea if we can, and we come up with a conclusion that says Korea is sending, you know, X number of troops to Russia to fight in Ukraine, and so that we can find that out. The question is then, what do we do?
Mhm.
Yeah. I want to go back to, I posted in the chat at the beginning, you know, can you survive a cyber attack? And so I thought this YouTube video was really good and listed, you know, how do you, you know, what, and it's basically any disaster, right? How are you resilient, right? So, you know, how do you deal, you know, if a cyber attack happens to the city, you know, how do you deal with power,
Right.
power and energy, water, food, communications, medicine, medical, financial, and so forth. So, you know, whether it's an earthquake, you know, a tornado, a hurricane, you know, a cyber attack, you know, these are like, how do you have as much resilience as possible?
Yeah.
You know, and so I thought that was a good area. And then government needs to have, you know, both at the local, state,
Mhm.
federal level, also, you know, what happens when bad things, you know, when bad things happen, how do you, you know, survive? How do you
Yeah.
become resilient?
I
Because bad
remember
things.
when Heidi, yeah,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I remember when Heidi, those of you who don't know, my wife, right? When I first met her, she was working for NCNB, North Carolina National Bank, which is today Bank of America. All right, and she was in the magnetic tape library function of the IT department. Um, and as you know, she liked to say, and the other people that work there, is this is where the real money is, guys. It's on the, you know, it's on the records, right? And they would take those, you know, look like reel to reel but thicker tapes, okay, that were running. They would make copies of those, and they would leave Charlotte and go to 4 backup centers, north,
Mhm.
south, and east, west, right? So that the bank would never completely lose, right, the records, because that's where the money was, right?
Right.
And any business, I mean, that was, I mean, I've been married for a long time, right? I'm not going to tell you how long, but a long time, all right? Any business that is not regularly backing itself up, right, and doing a procedure like that in some way, shape, or form, um, is inviting a problem, right? I mean, your if they encrypt your files and you have things elsewhere distributed so that you can restore yourself, then the threat is an empty threat, right?
Mhm.
So
And I can remember that
enough.
I once
Go
dated
ahead, Mark.
somebody who was working at a very big bank, one of the biggest banks, who suddenly got in charge of some of this, and where all these systems were in place. And one day she was talking with some employee and said, there are a lot of tapes that are supposed to be going out that are just sitting around. And it turned out that these systems, it's the people stuff again, were not actually being followed. They were perfect on paper, but they literally, the tapes were sitting in the same room and not being sent to those 4 centers.
Well, they had a different. I know that the procedure worked where they were, because that was the center of competency for banking at the time, and we asked to audit because I became aware of it, and they had a really good procedure. But you
But you
had
have
to
to
make sure
audit
that it.
constantly.
Yes, you do. You absolutely have to audit. And for you as individuals, you know, you might store some stuff in the cloud, all right, as a backup. But just so that you know, I actually monthly take a physical hard drive of my systems backed up and swap them out in a safety deposit box. That's the level of security that I have, right? So keep going. I'm going to have to drop it in a moment, and I'm going to ask Mike to continue with the conversation. So thanks for
drop as well.
everything you're doing. Huh?
I'm gonna need to drop as well.
Yep.
Thank you.
So Mike, the con is yours. Thanks everyone for this, and we will talk again next week. Looking forward to that, and for everyone who wished us well, meaning Kevin and Kyle, on our new authorship, we're delighted that we're out and available. So we'll be talking to you soon. Everything you do, be intentional. Mike, it's all over to you. Cheers.
Thanks, Kevin. Enjoy that. I don't know if anybody asked Kevin, I forgot. Did anybody see if there are any specific industries, or was it just a cybersecurity conference in general? Did anybody catch that? I forgot to ask. Because Doug, I noted you threw that data up there, and that, if I'm reading that correctly, it's the types of tactics that have been used, kind of generally what are seen as the tactics primarily used for using
the
Gen
one on
AI.
AI is the tactics. The top one was guide to being resilient to a cyber attack. You know, assume basically, you know, if bad things happen, how to survive,
Right.
you know, 3 weeks, you know, where you're off the grid and even off power, right? So
I was going to go look at that, but I bet it's a lot like that. A lot of the advice I've seen in those is very similar to what we all kind of grew up with. At least I grew up with, right? Is have a couple $500, you know, in an envelope in the freezer at all times. And I think likewise, right? Kevin was saying that I want to go watch that video, but I would imagine, you know, back up your drives, your financial information, etc.
Exactly.
And I think, you know, the challenge, though, the thing that we kind of touched on a little earlier is, and Rob mentioned, is we can go through institute these at companies, but to your point, you know, if somebody's not making their numbers because they're having to do, you know, remedial security-ish, you know, training, you know, how onerous can we make this? And I think that's a little extreme perspective, but I think what slowly has happened over the years is, you know, employees are not just being asked, but are understanding, right, that need to protect the data. But I was curious, we didn't get to ask Kevin this. I don't know if I would assume this is going to come up with some of the ransomware discussions I would assume they're going to have at this conference. You know, I think it's, you know, the bad guys will always say, don't call everybody, but we're all trained. Well, if there is something like this, you have to call somebody. But I'm wondering if we've seen that the responses grow, because we occasionally see stories. Doug, have you seen anything recent on that? You know, where a city, you know, I think it was out here, I can't remember if it was Oakland or Hayward, one of the East Bay cities, got their systems, you know, locked down and locked out by an attack. Is anybody aware of that? Is that, you know, still kind of a policy, is you don't let the citizens know that, you know, the city's data centers are essentially taken over, and, you know, nobody's going to get paychecks this week? Is that have you seen that training or that idea out there that you really
I have not.
discussed?
I mean, you could do a search to say,
Yeah.
you know, what cities have been ransomware attacked. You know, like Garmin about 3 years ago, I think got a ransomware attack. You know, which surprised me, but you know, and then the question is, do you pay or not? You know, then they had hospitals, you know,
Right.
get this and so forth. So yeah, you know, I guess the thing is, assume that you are going to be hacked. You are going to get you're at some time, and then how do you respond to that? You know, like I have stuff in Dropbox, I have stuff in Microsoft, I have stuff in Google, you know, I have stuff, you know, so you know, how, you know, like I had a backup computer, it was my old one, and it finally died a couple weeks ago. But, you know, it's nice that I had a secondary computer, so bad things happen. You know, I can come back pretty easy. In fact, what I'm thinking of doing is getting an Apple computer. So I have a Microsoft and I have an Apple. So, you know, it gives me some resilience from there as opposed to just two PCs. You know, but these are things to think about. You know, I right now I don't have a generator. I do have a generator in my car. It has a 1500 watt you know, AC, and for about $700 I can get a 1 kilowatt battery that then does AC, you know, DC to AC conversion. That could, you know, basically run my refrigerator and a fan in my house. You know, so it's kind of like, okay, do I spend the $700 to have it, you know, or do I go just to a motel if I'm out of power, right? If it's for more than a day.
Well, I mean, I could speak to friends of mine who live in fire-prone areas up in the mountains that they do have floating reservations. They've worked out with some hotel managers they know who live a couple 100 miles away.
Okay.
And that's, you know, I'm waiting for somebody to come up and make that a service, right? Is if you live in certain areas in California, up in the Sierras, and especially in the foothills, you know, does the city have an agreement with, you know, neighboring cities to provide hotel space, et cetera? I mean, we do have the emergency services and the kind of cooperation we see there, but that's, for example, you know, we've seen that in a lot of the big fires here. One of the first things people think of as smart, you know, and it makes sense, is to get out, right? Well, of course, let's leave. But you can see the waves of reservations at hotels spread, you know, almost every few minutes. You'll see lockouts or, you know, no vacancies spread, you know, over 50, 60, 70 miles as people take off and look for safety. And I think, you know, that's part of I would assume, Doug, I'll go look, like I said, watch that video. That's part of being resilient, right? Is having those sorts of plans in place. And I don't, you know, I think as far as cities and municipalities go, they do a lot of great work with what they have. But having sat through more than a few city and county, you know, supervisor meetings recently, you don't hear a lot of discussion about that. And it's about the cybersecurity, you know, maturity of my, you know, city or county. And I was wondering if that is part of a policy, which is we just don't like to talk about it very much because that gives people ideas. But I think it also would certainly alleviate a lot of people's concerns about their cities if they had a regular, as you were saying, regular audits that they then just, you know, made public and shared with the citizens. I think would be, you know, a great thing. But again, that maybe that violates certain principles of cybersecurity that I'm not aware of. But and it's another thing for people to keep track of. But it is one of those things I would think that we would be, you know, most cities would be, well, you know, it would be a good idea for them to be able to provide that sort of update in terms of the infrastructure. Because what they get now, what citizens get now, is they only hear about bad news, right? When the city's computers have been locked up for a week. They don't ever hear. And, you know, that's certainly an expenditure I think most of us would agree a city or county should be doing as far as those regular security audits.
Well, and we'll see, like in Israel and Iran, right? Will Israel do a cybersecurity attack on some of their systems? Like right now, Israel is bombing banks in Lebanon, right? You know, it's like, okay, Hezbollah is getting money, so we can get rid of that situation.
Right.
But we'll see with that, and then Iran then retaliate try to do it Israel or the United States, right? And you know, I believe that there were cyber attacks between Russia and Ukraine going on.
Oh yeah. Well, they were
know,
targeting the energy. It was
Yeah.
a lot of the electrical grid is what they were targeting. At least the Russians were targeting, and I think the Ukrainians were targeting the Russians. And I
Yeah.
think that's, you know, it's interesting. But as you know, don't know about the rest of you, that kind of does make me, when I'm out in the world, with the kind of work we do and the topics we look at, I was out yesterday paddling out in the bay. It's like, why? Those are unmarked helicopters. Why are they underneath the radar or the high tension power lines? They look like they were doing drills. Like, how you're going to put a piece of equipment in place. But it's kind of thing where you think, boy, what are those guys doing over there with those helicopters near those power lines that bring all the power to the San Francisco, to the peninsula, basically. But I think, again, getting to the point where if we have more clarity on that in terms of, what our cities, our counties are doing and how we as individuals can protect ourselves more effectively. I think it isn't just about being resilient. It's about being adapting, but not getting overwhelmed, right, by the constant need or concern about the security of a given situation, whether it's my computer or my relationship with the bank.
Yeah.
More
Well, it's like
education,
any
better.
insurance, right?
Yeah.
Like how much, like when I pay, it would be interesting to know what my net worth I pay on insurance, right? For your house. And
I had
so
a friend who hasn't bought and never buys life insurance. He said, I just considered that betting against myself, buying insurance. But
is his wife happy about that?
well, he's like a professional adrenaline
His
junkie
relatives.
too. And no, which wife?
Yeah,
Current
do you have a
or the
wife?
previous?
Yeah.
Current or
If he has a-
previous? But that's I think I may have finally exhausted the topic for now. But I mean, does anybody else have anything before we get ready to close off? I know we're a little early, but we had a couple of folks who have some other appointments. Is there anything else we wanted to kind of touch
Yeah,
on?
Mike.
Go ahead,
When
Susan.
when I download all my publications, I was wondering, how do I get to use your voice as a makeover? Because I'd really like you to be the one that's talking
Well,
to the person.
you
Oh
can you could talk to my personal representative, Rob O'Regan, who'll be happy to share my day rate, and any back end royalties that might occur as far as future distribution. I'm open for offers. I saw a voice actor thing and I thought, hey, that looks fun. And then I looked at it. It's for an AI firm, and they wanted you to work 12 hours a day on contract to do, essentially voice work. And I was like, well, wait a minute, an AI company. See, Ed, Doug, and it was fascinating. Well, thank you. That's a very nice compliment you gave me. I'd be happy to.
When you have a nice thought, you're supposed to share it right away and get it out
Well,
there.
I should,
I think your voice is $1 million voice. So
well,
it'd be cool to choose the AI that has that voice.
Share that your opinion out there, because then maybe somebody will call Rob.
Yeah,
me.
the flip side of that, Mike, is that you've got a face made for radio. So
hey, I knew you were going to come up with that one sooner or later.
Yeah, we just we have to put video just like they do on all the AI.
I refuse. I will not let my image be altered. I have potential name, image, likeness revenue coming in the forward, so
there you go.
Preserve that.
Well, you can
not have it.
You'll have a filter. Like I always joke that everyone's avatar is 15 years younger and 15 pounds lighter. And it's like, what do you want to look like? And
well, I want the brain that I have now and all my experience in the body of the 20-year-old Mike McGuire. I really don't want the 20-year-old Mike McGuire's psyche at all. The world is better off for that having been way in the past.
Yeah. So Peter, just one comment, kind of a little bit off the subject, but Peter Diamandis has the X Prize of longevity. So they take it between 50 and 80. If you get $79 million, if you can come up with a procedure that makes you it's basically 20 years younger, either in it's in 3 areas: cognitive ability, physical ability, and immune system ability. And the way to do that is you find unhealthy people who haven't exercised or diet and just give them better diets. They did a study in the 60s that they put 20-year-olds in bed rest for 30 days, and they had the strength of a 50-year-old. So if you want to age someone 30 years, put them on bed rest, right? And if you want to make
Exactly.
something, you know, on average 20 years younger, you know, if they have not exercised their diet, start that going.
Get them running marathons.
Well, no, that would, don't overdo it though, right? It's balance. So, and that goes
Well,
back
on
to
the other hand, if you big enough sample size, if you winnow out the unhealthy ones with the extra
and that's what
workout,
you have to do, you know, to say, you know, but you know, it's kind of like what are the, like right now, according to Social Security, I have a 1.5% chance of dying this year. And so in fact, this book I'm writing with Harvey
1.5.
Castro is how do you avoid death this year, in the next 10 years? You know, so that, you know, some of this technology can help you even more so, right? And
Or
so
how do you avoid
1.5?
data that's going to bum you out by reading
Right,
statistics like
exactly.
that?
yeah, exactly. Now, see, I think
I don't want to. Oh, this is depressing. I'm going to go eat more Cheez-Its and chocolate
Exactly.
milk.
yeah, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you can get hit by a bus, right? You know.
Also an approach. Boy, we've now hit a really bright and cheerful element of the discussion.
Yeah, but this goes to resilience, right? How do you,
True.
you know,
Right.
how do you have a healthy resilience? And this goes back to like talking to your doctor and clinician. You know, if you're not giving, you know, basically the doctor is a professional that's supposed to give you advice on how to optimize
Yeah.
your health, right? And if you're not giving that professional the information they need to make the best decision for you, you're just cheating yourself.
Yeah. And they can, you know, I've, you know, this has been, you know, something I've learned with my own physician over the years. He says, because, you know, most of the time we know when you're bullshitting.
Yeah.
The blood tests pretty much tell us what we need to know. So why bother? Why get yourself screwed up with that? He said that's, you know, what he has to tell his young doctors coming on is you don't want to be a scold, but you also don't want to be perceived as a pushover or an idiot, right? He
Yeah,
said, so
that's why whenever someone has a study on self-reporting, you know, it's like, okay, I don't believe it, because
exactly.
self-reporting is not accurate, right? So we lie to ourselves. I mean, AI hallucinates, but we hallucinate to ourselves. We
Oh,
deceive ourselves.
absolutely. It's called ego. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's, I actually don't worry about AGI as much. What I worry about is they develop egos, the AI engines, you know,
Yeah,
sentient,
exactly.
you know, that's fine. I just don't have any ego. But everybody, I think we've had a fun conversation, a good one.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining. We'll see you next week. And to paraphrase Kevin, well, to quote Kevin, in everything you do, be intentional. Take care, everybody. See you next week.
Hey
Thanks,
guys.
guys.